Notre Dame is in the hunt for several top recruits, including Javion Osborne. But who will the Irish get, and who's next?
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Today, we're going to be talking all things Notre Dame, including the depth chart, the opportunity for either CJ Carr or Kenny Minchey to start, some other spots. Where does Notre Dame stand? Who do they still need in the transfer portal, if anybody? But we start with the recruiting realm. Javion Osborne is going to announce May 3rd. You got Tiki Hola that's going to announce May 10th, and several other prospects. Let's just talk about that with the guy that covers Notre Dame every day, Tyler Wojciak. Tyler, how you doing, brother? How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How about yourself?
Doing well. A lot of things going on in Notre Dame's world, but there's some flux. I think that we could safely say the roster's got to be trimmed. We'll talk about that, the portal. But with recruiting, we've got a couple of big commitments possibly coming up. Texas guys that Notre Dame, at least at one point, people thought they were going to get, but recruiting so fluid. I always give a little bit of space there. Javion Osborne is a kid from Forney, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Kid I had the opportunity to meet at the Under Armour All-American game in January. Really electric player. Catches the football just as well as he runs it. Michigan or Notre Dame. Looked like the Irish, but then he visits Michigan again. Your first reaction when you heard that was what?
So it was always part of the plan. It was not like the Michigan visit kind of came up out of nowhere. But considering the lead that they had for so long before Ja'Juan Seider came to the mix for Notre Dame, he gets hired as the running backs coach for the Irish. And then they were not only in the folds, but it felt like they were the leader. He was on campus for the spring game. And Notre Dame felt like they were in a really good place. But that looming visit concerned me. Now, some other people are not concerned at all. They think that Osborne is a lock to be Irish, and maybe that's who he ends up committing with here in just over a week. But the fact that they had a lead for such a long time and they get the last word, so to speak, with him being on campus recently, I think that makes me a little bit nervous. Ultimately, I do think that he's going to end up with the Irish. That's who he's going to commit to here in, I think, a week and a half. And that would be a huge get for Notre Dame, because last year, I think we can all be pretty honest that it wasn't the best running backs class. They had two guys committed for a really long time. Then they ended up parting ways with both of them very late in the game. But fortunately, they were able to get Nolan James Jr. late in the process, who actually looks pretty good, made a really good first impression as an early enrollee. But they're looking to get two running backs in this class, and getting a guy like Osborne would be huge to start them off.
Yeah, he really would. And for those that don't know, he's 5'9", 5'10", 195 pounds. He reminds me somewhat of a Autry Denson type, but with more speed. Like, he bounces off players like a pinball, and he's also got those really quick, I don't want to just say choppy feet, but like he stops and starts, not like many other players do. He's top 5 running back nationally, and Notre Dame is going to lose not one, but two guys. I would assume DeJarian's not going to come back for a 5th year, although he would have it. There's zero chance of that. So the running back room, it opens up a little bit. I've heard rumblings about some guys possibly leaving. We'll talk about that in a little bit with the transfer portal, but we'll see. But right now, there's a chance for a running back that comes in this class to actually get at least some reps. I'm not saying they'd play a ton, but there's a chance. And I'm sure that Ja'Juan Seider is kind of pitching that to Notre Dame, to the recruits. But I don't know. If it's not Osborne, then it just opens up. There's a lot of guys that it could be. Do you think Notre Dame should take one, or do you think they should try to take two backs because of losing Price and Love at the end of this year?
I think they have to take two. I don't even think it's debatable, because they're definitely losing Love. They're definitely losing Price, and they're probably going to lose one other guy who's currently in the room right now, potentially here in like the next couple days. So that room is really going to open up. Now, assuming Aeneas Williams and Keaton Young come back for next year, they're more than likely going to be the first and second options at that position. But that room thins out quickly. Whereas like last year, it's probably a tough sell to the top running backs in the class that they're going to get any early playing time, knowing that Love had another year of eligibility and knowing that Price had another year. So I do think it's an easier sell for Jaywan Sider in this circumstance. And it looks like they're pretty high on the list for 4 different prospects. Bonner is a name that you and I have talked about before. I think if Notre Dame were able to land Osborne and Bonner, that would be an A-plus home run combination at the running back position, arguably one of their best classes in decades. And I thought the Williams-Young group was really, really strong a few years ago. I think this would clear that significantly, but they're close to the finish line. They got to get it done. But ultimately, I do have faith that Sider is going to land 2 of the guys that he really wants right now, because they still have several months before the early signing period, and they've already put themselves in great position.
I think there's a caveat to that. I think they could take one, possibly, although Sider is such a good recruiter, he might get to, but they could take a guy out of the portal as well next December. That's always a possibility. Sure. But when he was at Penn State, off the top of my head, I don't think Sider took any transfers that if they did, I don't recall it. And nobody that played, because he did so well at the high school ranks, he didn't have to. So we'll see how that works. But Notre Dame's probably going to lose at least one running back. Maybe they'll lose another 2. You never know. But I agree. If I had to guess, it would be 2. Sticking with recruiting, the other guy we didn't discuss is Tiki Hola. He's out of, I want to say, not just East Texas, not that far from Austin, maybe an hour away, just east. Big D tackle, really smart kid. He's got offers from all kinds of programs, but it sounds like it's Notre Dame or SMU. Most people think it's Notre Dame. And the reason I bring him up is not just because his commitment's coming up, but Notre Dame has struggled forever at signing D tackles. They're in on a whole bunch of them. If they get Tiki, and you take 2 if you can in each class, that puts you in the driver's seat to be very selective down the stretch. Now, would they take a 3rd if it's the right guy? Yes, but you could just bide your time and go big game hunting. What have you heard about him, and is there anything that you want to add to his profile?
Notre Dame feels pretty confident about where they're at here with Tiki Hola. Now, going up against SMU is always a little bit concerning because he's from Texas. SMU's not that far, and SMU has basically unlimited bankroll down there. So I feel like NIL, you don't normally consider SMU as like one of the top NIL schools, but they're basically funding their transition to the ACC. So money really isn't that hard to come by down there. So, that always makes you worry just a little bit, but I do feel like Notre Dame is in great position here, and they really need him. He's not like the most important prospect in this class, but as you pointed out, they have really, really struggled to get really solid interior defensive linemen at the high school recruiting ranks. That's why they had to go out there and get Jared Dawson from Louisville in the transfer portal and Elijah Hughes from USC, who's not even projected to start. He's like a rotational piece. And the reason they had to do that is because they have missed a lot at D tackle over the years. So now they're trying to make up for that. They're doing really good on the edges in this class. I mean, adding Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Iwatade is a great start, but the ends are pretty solid right now on the depth chart. You look at Bryce Young, what he could be. Logan Thomas could end up being really good. So they really need to shore up D tackle, and landing a guy like Tiki Hola puts them in much better position going forward, because then you have a lot more time to, like you said, go big game hunting.
Yeah, I agree. And like Mikhail Blade's a kid they're after out of Chicago, but everybody's after him. Kerry Wilder is a kid out of California that's kind of blown up. They're after him. A few other guys at D tackle like Noah Clark they're after. Kid they made a move with out of North Carolina. Notre Dame, like the one spot that they've struggled with in the last 5 years by a mile more than any other is D tackle. If they shore that up, they'll get to the point where they really don't need anything out of the portal other than to plug holes for injuries or guys that turn pro early. Everybody has those. But right now, you could make an argument that Notre Dame's conservatively a top 5 program in terms of just base roster. Like they don't have holes. Every spot's pretty good for the most part. And I'm sure they're still doing their due diligence, talking to people in the portal. But off the top of my head, I don't think they're going after anybody. Like due diligence is one thing, but like actively, like we want you now. If there is somebody, I'm unaware. That's kind of my area, the transfer portal. So that tells you how good recruiting's been. Any other spots that you think that they really need to hit with recruiting, or is D tackle the one concern that they got to hit this year, right? If they don't, that'd be disappointing.
Wide receiver is huge for this class as well. They've missed that wide receiver so many times in the past. Now, all of a sudden, Elijah Burris, like that commitment from last year's class might be looking a little bit different right now, because I think people saw the fact that he was like a low 3-star when Notre Dame first landed that commitment. He's a player who had a nice little rise at the recruiting ranks throughout his senior season, but still he was kind of looked at as a developmental player. Then he gets on campus in the winter and was one of the most impressive freshmen, actually arguably the most impressive freshman of any of the early enrollees during spring practice. I don't know if he's going to play this year, but it seems like he's more than likely going to make some sort of impact early on in his career. But still, you can't just rely on one guy. You need to get more guys in. They got Bubba Frazier, who kind of came out of nowhere. Like, they offered him in February and then got his commitment 2 months later after he really showed out at that Under Armour camp. So it seems like they're trending in the right direction, but then there's guys like Braden Robinson and Finley, who they've been after for a long time. So they need to close on those guys. But if they are able to land some high-end receivers and some D tackles, that would really buck the trend for what they've been doing on the recruiting trail over the past few years.
It's crazy that Notre Dame is so active in Texas. I just keep looking. We keep going back to Texas. For those that don't know, Braden Robinson, it's a kid I saw in 8th grade, and he was the fastest guy on the field when he was in 8th grade. And I was at an elite 7-on-7 tournament. I mean, he's track fast. Caden Finley's probably best defined as a Jaden Greathouse clone. That would be the way. Greathouse is a little bigger at this point, but that's the kind of player he is. Certainly nothing wrong with that based on how Greathouse played against Penn State and Ohio State, for sure, over 100 yards. But yeah, those are the two biggest areas for Notre Dame. When we come back, we're going to shift to the transfer portal. Notre Dame has a very unique scenario because they actually have to trim the roster just to get down to the numbers instead of going up. That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Baseball season's in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, PrizePicks keeps every game exciting. Fast and simple. It's easy to get your lineup done in less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick. They also have promotions like Taco Tuesday that allows you to get discounts on select players. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Transfer portal for Notre Dame is very unique. For those that don't know or have forgotten, it's kind of bizarre what they did. And I'm not sure the reasoning for this all the way around. I probably don't want to know with the NCAA anymore, but you have 105 players on your roster, regardless if they were brought in as a walk-on, a scholarship player, what, everybody gets one now. So that basically means a bunch of walk-ons are going to get canned across college football, for one. But at the same time, you might even have some scholarship guys that get cut. Not going to name a school, but I talked to somebody today that there was a player that otherwise wouldn't have gotten cut, but he got in a little trouble off the field, and they're real close on their numbers. They cut him right there and then. Any little thing, and you're gone. So Notre Dame, the last I heard was, and this could have changed in the last 24 hours, but about 11 players over the total. Now, there's a long time before. I think it's August 1st you got to get down to, something like that. But is there any concern on your end that they're going to end up in a tough spot? Nobody likes it. Like, Notre Dame's really touchy about cutting kids or whatever. There's some exceptions, but for the most part, they can't get kids to leave there. It's the opposite of most schools because they want their degree. Different kind of kid goes to Notre Dame. Tyler, for those that don't know, Notre Dame grad, he gets it. But, like, does it seem a little like 11 is a lot? Where do you stand on that?
11 is a lot, and they are going to have some really difficult conversations here soon because they officially wrap up spring practice on Wednesday. And the timing is a little odd to end spring practice like smack dab in the middle of the transfer portal window. But considering their season didn't end until January 20th, like, they had to reshuffle some things with this year's spring practice, and they probably didn't want to go up to this point, but that's just kind of how it happened with the amount of time they needed in between the end of last season and the start of spring practice. But look, Pete Bavacqua started talking about this during a press conference back in December, fully aware that the hard cap to the roster was coming. And Notre Dame basically has two plans in place. One, if that settlement passes and they are at 105-man roster, or if it doesn't, and then they're able to keep on all the walk-ons. Now, one thing that has sort of been like a quiet storyline, the only people who really care about it are people really follow Notre Dame closely, and that's they've really improved their walk-on program. Like there are some real football players who came on as preferred walk-ons that could have played it, under scholarship at a smaller school, not like Power 5, obviously, or Power 4 now, I should say, but they bring in some really good players to round out that roster. And I think there's a situation where, a lot of walk-ons are going to get cut, but there's also some scholarship guys who are at the very bottom that now are in competition with walk-ons pretty much every single day. And this has been going on throughout spring practice. Marcus Freeman was pretty open about it at a press conference at like the beginning of spring when he was like, there's a lot of guys who have uncertain futures. And the one thing that he preaches to them every single day is be the best version of yourself today. That's a lot easier said than done when you're looking around the room and you're thinking, man, like you kind of know where you stand. So it's a really difficult spot, but it's not something that came up as a surprise for Notre Dame. They've known this was coming for a while, but pretty soon here, they're going to have those conversations. And I do not envy the coaching staff, but hey, that's part of the job.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman and his staff are well compensated. I'm not going to feel sorry for them at all. With that being said, Wednesday's the last day. I'm sure there are several guys that are on the fence on whether they want to go. I've heard some guys that are going to go, maybe some of the same ones that you've heard, if any. I haven't talked to you about it, but that's part of the business. And I was talking to somebody that covers another team here on the Locked On Network. People need to be remembering, for the most part, Notre Dame's a little different, but for the most part, kids pick coaches and opportunities more than schools. I know a lot of fans, especially Notre Dame fans, really hate that. But if you're not playing by the end of your sophomore year and you're a highly recruited guy, you're gone. You're going to leave. And that's kind of the way it is. It's the bottom end of it. Even if Notre Dame was like 3 over, it would take care of itself. 11, there might have to be a few subtle pushes out the door. But at the same time, I bet you they lose 5 more guys, give or take, is my guess, just right after the spring window is over with. And if it's 7 or 8, I wouldn't be shocked. Kids cannot stand sitting the bench, like freshman year maybe, but sophomores, I bet some of the freshmen that thought they were going to be ready to play that didn't make a dent in spring will be first. I mean, what is your take on that? Like, do you sense that too? But I've seen it around several schools, like the freshmen that didn't do well around the country, they're hitting the portal.
I mean, you already saw it with Kennedy Urlacher, who had some moments as a freshman, but he wanted to play now, and there really wasn't a path to playing time for him this season, at least not anything significant. Like he would have been a key contributor on special teams again. That's what he was last year. And then he played in some garbage time against Purdue when Notre Dame was up by 1,000 in that game. And he played really well. So like, this is not a knock on Kennedy Urlacher, but if you want to play, you're looking at the room and you got Adon Schuler. They brought in Jalen Stroman for Virginia Tech, who is a graduate transfer. And then Luke Talich had a really good spring. Tay Johnson physically is a freak, and they're in the same class. He was hurt all of last year, but now it seems like he's kind of coming into his own at safety. So it's like Kennedy Urlacher was 5th string. So it sucks losing a guy like that, but at the same time, he wants to play, and I understand it. So that's one type of prospect who leaves, and it's like you wish you could keep him, but you also understand. I think Notre Dame is probably going to lose a couple guys that they would love to keep and would contribute this season. But this is kind of the nature of college football. And one thing that I sort of remind my listeners all the time is like, we are so focused on things through like a Notre Dame lens. So whenever players leave Notre Dame, you think this is the only place where it's happening. Where actually it's happening a lot less at Notre Dame. Like Georgia, they lost a ton of players. They lose them every year now because Georgia is recruiting at such a high level and at the high school ranks. Like 5-stars certainly don't want to wait around. And Georgia just has so many good players that you ask them to sit for a year or two and they don't want to do that. So then they end up going elsewhere. Notre Dame has avoided that to some extent because I think that, one, they're very honest with the players before they even get to Notre Dame. And once they're in the door, like that's one thing you hear a lot about Marcus Freeman and his staff. They're very transparent, sometimes brutally honest with their players about where they sit on the roster. But when you look at the attrition for Notre Dame, it really has not been that bad. That's the main reason why they have 11 more guys on the roster than they're going to be allowed to have. So they're probably going to lose some players that you don't want to lose. But at the same time, when you look around college football, they're actually doing a lot better job at keeping their guys than even some of the top programs in the country.
That's the other part of this. I'm not going to like run over anybody and put it in reverse and go back over them. But there's a few schools, they recruited well, But it's not who you recruit, it's who you retain and develop. And there are a few schools that it's just been a mass exodus. And despite their reputation for putting guys in the NFL, they've kind of fallen off a little bit. Even Georgia has too. And like Notre Dame as a overall roster, again, it's so balanced. Now they're not quite as high end like at D tackle and a few other spots like DB. Notre Dame's DB room is as good as there is in the country. And they just lost a guy that if he hadn't got hurt last year, would have been a first round pick. So running back room, except for maybe Penn State, you could argue Notre Dame's might be the best. O-line, they're in a really good spot at a lot of places. I think they're pretty fortunate. It's just trying to figure out which guys are going to be the ones that are going to leave. Speaking of which guys, there's two. They're really trying to win the quarterback job. I still think it's going to be one at the end that everybody thinks, but we're going to talk Notre Dame quarterback battle next here on the Portal Podcast. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute ticket deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why Gametime is such a good deal. Not only is it 60% off for an NBA playoff game, but for anything that you would get at Gametime. Comedy, theater, you could go to any kind of concert, doesn't matter what it is. If it's on Gametime's app, as the game or the event comes closer, the prices go down. Plus, speaking of pricing, all-in pricing, whatever you see at the beginning is what you will see at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Tyler, there's been a self-removal. That's one player they didn't have to worry about. Steve Angeli, who by the time this airs may have committed to Syracuse based on all the crystal balls. We'll get into that in just a minute. But it's going to be Minchie or Carr at quarterback. Now, for those that don't know much about Kenny Minchie, he's a really good athlete, and he can spin it. I had a chance to be around him a few years ago at Elite 11. But any other year, I think he would end up being the guy. But CJ Carr, barring something unforeseen, is going to be the quarterback. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what Marcus says in front of a microphone. He's not going to change my opinion with the eye test. CJ Carr makes plays that nobody else does. So my question to you is, do you agree with me? And B, are you worried that whoever ends up losing gets out of Dodge before the first game?
I do think it's going to be Carr. At least at this point, I'm not too concerned about Minchie leaving because I do think they're going to give Minchie a legitimate chance to win the job over the course of the summer. But ultimately, I do believe it's going to be Carr. I think, the way that they viewed him and the way that people have talked about him, who are clearly getting information from inside the program, I think tells you the sort of belief that Notre Dame has in CJ Carr. And look, they've been wrong before, not necessarily this regime, but Phil Dracovic was supposed to be the second coming. Tyler Buchner at one point was supposed to take this team to the next level, and it didn't work out. But at least with CJ Carr, you've seen it actually happen on the field. Now, granted, it was just a spring game, but I thought he looked excellent in that game. And at the beginning, I was joking with some of my friends, like CJ Carr was playing so well relative to the other quarterbacks that it felt like Sam Hartman versus Tyler Buchner in 2023. And I was worried that, man, maybe Minchie and Angeli end up transferring after this game because Carr is dominating them. But Minchie then really came through later on in that spring game. So I do think that it's a two-man competition. I think they're going to let it play out because the coaching staff understands that you need a backup. And Kenny Minchie, if he ends up being the backup, would be a great option. Just think about how far this quarterback room has come. In 2022, they had Tyler Buchner as redshirt freshman and Drew Pine. If you took this version of Kenny Minchie, dropped him in that room, he is without question the starting quarterback. And now, he's climbing uphill, I would say, to win that job. But hey, he proved a lot of people wrong so far just to even get to this point. Most people thought it would end up being Angeli and Carr, but it's Minchie versus Carr now. So I think he's already proven some people wrong. If he ends up winning the job, I would certainly be surprised. But hey, man, he's a really talented player, like you said, and he brings a little bit he brings some different things to the table with his legs. So it's going to be really interesting to see how not only this plays out, but how Marcus Freeman talks about it over the course of these next few months.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting take because, as you said, the room has changed a lot in South Bend. I used to make fun of the Notre Dame quarterback room. Open-ended.
As you should.
It's like at Notre Dame, that should never happen. It just shouldn't. And did it ever. So when Ian Book was far and away the best player you had at quarterback for years, that's not a good sign because he just didn't have a high ceiling. Yeah. Really good player for the college level, but he was the same guy for 3 years and he actually regressed a little bit. But anyway, my next question is one that's a little bit different. I don't know how fall camp will go, and I'm not saying they won't give Minchie a chance, but my gut tells me there's a bigger chance that he leaves before the season than most want to hear. Kids don't want to wait, and he's not going into his sophomore year. He's going into his junior. If he leaves, Notre Dame is in a horrible spot at quarterback because, look, you got a true freshman as your backup. That is an F- right out the gate. It just is because you can't do anything with Carr with running him. You got to worry about every quarterback sneak. Like if he gets hurt, season's over. How do you think Marcus is going to try to handle that? Because there's just no friendly. At some point, you have to not only say one of you's the winner, but you need to do it a little bit earlier in fall camp so you get all the number one reps to a guy and you build continuity. You got to remember, like, I forget the kid's name, but the receiver from Virginia isn't even here yet.
Yeah, Malachi Fields.
Yeah, and like they gotta go through all that. That's a lot of work. So he's in an awkward spot. What would you do if you were Marcus Freeman? Would you be like, you know what, the heck with it? I'm just going to let it fly, or would you try to play the middle? What would you do?
I would pay Kenny Minchie more than he probably deserves. I think that's what you do in this situation because one thing with Kenny Minchie is he did redshirt already. So I don't think it's a situation where, he sticks around for the beginning of the season and then leaves after 4 games because he doesn't get another year of eligibility. Like he can't redshirt again. So I think they're having those discussions right now because he has not graduated from Notre Dame yet. So he has until the portal window closes here at the end of this week. So I'm sure that the thought has crossed Minchie's mind, but Notre Dame has to make sure that they keep him around. And I think the best way to do that would be up his NIL package because there were some reports out there that Steve Angeli was getting offered significant money after the end of last season. I think that one drive against Penn State really upped his value and now he's out the door. So I think that you could take some of that money, give it to Kenny Minchie and say, hey, not only are you going to have a chance to win this job, like you're going to get paid more than most backup quarterbacks would get paid. Also because he has a chance to win the job. So look, it's a really difficult thing to deal with, but I also feel like Kenny Minchie does want to prove some people wrong and try to win this job. And even though I think you and I are both on the same page, we do think it's going to end up being Carr. Like, there aren't that many great options out there right now. We're kind of seeing it with Steve Angeli. Like, I think Syracuse is a good fit for him. But other than that, like, is Minchie going to go to Tulane, Virginia Tech? Like, Tennessee was a place that I thought maybe he could go to because he's from Hendersonville, Tennessee. Like at one point I felt like that could happen, but they've already got their quarterback. So I feel like he's probably in a better position to stay at Notre Dame for one more year, give it a real go to be the starter, make some good money while doing it. And then if it ends up being Carr, then he could transfer at the end of next season.
Yeah. I don't know how it's going to work, but he's in a rough spot. If that's, it'd be a tough decision because I'm sure he wants to get his Notre Dame degree. He's a smart kid, very articulate. But everybody wants to play. And again, He's already used his red shirt, and this will be his 3rd season in South Bend. So that's a really interesting situation. Tyler, tell everybody where they can find your work.
Locked On Irish every weekday, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, all that. You can also follow me on Twitter or at Tyler, WOJCIAK. And as we talked about at the beginning, a lot of news coming down the pipe here for Notre Dame in the next few weeks, both in the transfer portal and on the recruiting trail. So it should be a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. You can find the Portal Podcast, all the same places you can find Locked On Irish, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Podbean, anywhere else you get your podcast. Please like and subscribe. Give us a review. This has been the Portal Podcast.